Hello there. I just can't keep my eyes out of this book. It's a good reread even now. But welcome again. We are on our 5th lesson so far. Today's lesson is about reading basics, high-set reading basics. So if you think about it, I just like to read, and I like this book, and I'm sure some of you have read to your children or grandchildren, or you just like to pick up a book and read. Other people like to listen to a book being read to them, all the audio books and things, when they're doing other things. So there's different ways of reading. But today, because this is a course in our Northern Berkshire Adult Education program, I want to show you a few things that will help you if you are in this course or any of the other courses, because the end result is that you will go through our program. You'll start with ABE Language Arts, which is this show, and then you'll proceed into the ASE, which is Adult Secondary Education, and that prepares you to take the test. Between that, I forgot, there is a pre-ASE, pre-Adult Secondary Education. So we guide you along the way. And how do you get into those different courses? We give you pre-tests and practice tests as soon as we feel that, and you feel that you're ready to proceed on to harder things or things that are more test-oriented. Then you move on, and then eventually you take 5 tests. So I just wanted to explain that a little further to you. There are 5 tests: reading, writing, science, social studies, math, and those are the 5 tests. So in order to get your high school, and that's what HiSET stands for, High School Equivalency Tests, and in order to get that, you have to basically score an 8 out of 20 questions correct on each of those subject areas, and then you also have to score a 2 on a 6-point essay in the writing test, and then the total scaled score, they call it, after you've taken all 5 tests, has to be 45 points. And that scaled score, just to explain a little bit about it, it compares your score to graduating high school students, and across the nation now, 60% of high school graduating seniors pass the HiSET. So that's just kind of interesting factoids for your benefit. So my point is in our program with teachers, staff, advisors, you have a lot of support you may not have had in school, and we take in consideration of the fact that you are an adult, you have a family, or you're looking for work, or a number of things that high school students may not have had through the first shot of K through 12. So consider us. I'm sure you would do well. And the other thing Bob has mentioned before, how long does it take? It's up to you. And that's basically it. With your effort, our support, you've got 5 tests to take, but it's not an impossible goal. Many students get the HiSET completed within a year. Some stay for as long as they want, and no one ever kicks you out. So just wanted to pass that along. But having said that, the reading for the HiSET exam requires a few other things that are not just general reading. So today what I'd like to do is I would like to continue exploring the book The Outsiders, and hopefully you've found it on your Canvas site, and it is online. So we just were talking about chapter 1 last week. I read it to you. In a class situation, we do what is called a popcorn read, where a student reads for a little bit, and then they choose someone else to read, and then they choose someone else, and you can read just one sentence or the whole paragraph if you get on a roll. And so it makes it a more group thing where we all share reading of the book, because sometimes it helps to hear it out loud. And that's another point. Always, if you get a chance to read to someone else, that's helpful for you too. So in chapter 1, what we had, basically we met the characters, and and I read until I got all the characters in that actually really take there's a few more that come in chapter 2, but these are the main characters in this book. There is one main character, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But I did want you to notice that some of them have very unusual names. So the first person we met in the book was Pony Boy. He has a brother Soda Pop, a brother Dairy, and then there's other members of what he calls the Greasers that are his group. One is 2-Bit Matthews, and they've forgotten what his actual first name is. And I think if you think back, when you were growing up, a lot of your friends had nicknames, and that's the name you called them rather than their birth name, so to speak. But it's in a regular test in, say, K through, I'd say, middle school, maybe 6th or 7th grade, you might have gotten a comprehension test on this, where they're saying basic things like who is the person, or what's the person's name that is a brother to Pony Boy, and it starts with an S, and so you'd have to answer Soda Pop. With high-set questions, they're much more in-depth, and they have 2 parts, a lot of them, and they ask you, after you answered the original question, prove it from something in the text. So I'll show you how that looks, and it is going deeper than what you would normally see as a reading of something and even in school up to, say, 6th or 7th grade, I'd say. So I want to go to the whiteboard now and give you a few more terms that we're looking at, because these are the terms where the questions come from that you're asked on the high-set test. So join me at the whiteboard. So these are the things that people are looking at when they put an excerpt of a story, or they're asking you to analyze a text. The first thing the first few questions that they may ask are about character development in the story. And in the story, there's usually a main character who gets the fancy name of the protagonist. So pro is one of those suffixes I talked about. It means he or she is for a particular goal. They're trying to achieve something in the story. And that protagonist, by the end of the story, should change in some way. A protagonist may start out as an unlikely hero. And most hero stories start out with maybe a small child who has lost one parent, maybe a father, or both parents, and they somehow rise to the occasion and are older than their years, and they would also seem like a very unlikely hero. But by the end of the story, they become the hero. And that's usually the main character because he has a particular goal. There's a purpose to this person's life. An antagonist is the opposite with that suffix ant, and that means he is against the protagonist achieving his goal. He tries to stop that. He tries to put obstacles in his way. It could be another person. Doesn't mean that the protagonist is a good guy and the antagonist is a bad guy. It's just that they're sort of in opposing places. It could be two friends who are trying to get the touchdown or something. You know what I mean? They're both trying to get the same goal. But in a lot of stories, especially more modern stories, you might have a really bad guy being the protagonist because he wants to blow up something, or that he would still be the protagonist because through the story, whatever his goal is has to be what leads the story through things. There are also supporting characters, and the supporting characters, you've seen them a dozen times. They're like the sidekick. You have the Batman and Robin type of stories. You have Don Quixote and the little, he's got the great horse and he goes off to solve the problems of evil in the world, and he has his little sidekick on a donkey, So those are quite frequent. But again, keep in mind, the main character is the protagonist. The thing about a protagonist also, you see that he has a goal, but also he's usually the one that basically never gives up, because once he gives up, the story would be over. And even if he's killed, that's the end of the story pretty much. So that's how you tell who the main character is. They're the person with a goal. The other thing that is looked into when they ask you questions on the high-set reading test is, what's the conflict in the story? And there's two kinds of conflict. A character can have an internal conflict. It may be that this person has some sort of an addiction. They could have an anger problem. They could not get along with people in some way, and that causes a conflict between the character and the outside world. But the conflict, once that internal conflict is solved, the protagonist will reach his goal and be successful. But it's internal, it's within the character. If it's external, it's a character against another character, or it can be one group against another group. And then the third kind of conflict can be a character or a group of people, and they have a conflict with a force of nature, like a hurricane or a war, where it's out of their control what happens, but they have to succeed in just their goal is to stay alive in that type of situation. So character development, conflict. The third thing that we see as far as questions on a high-set reading test is the point of view. So who actually is telling the story? The author of a book can choose 3 different ways to tell a story. He can use the first-person narrative that they call the first-person narrative, because the most of the story starts with the pronoun I. I walked out of the movie theater. I did this, I did that. That's the first-person view of what happens in the story. The second-person point of view is the author is telling you a story about something that happened, and he or she, the author, is often, and I'm trying to draw you here, you person. They're telling you a story, and they're talking about people in the story using the pronoun he did this, she did that, but that second person narrative is they were in the story. They saw it happen. It could be a brother, a friend who, I'm thinking of Roger Clementi and as a book that's a really good second person narrative, because the brother of that baseball player told the story. So the third one, though, is and I actually, it has a term, omniscient, and it stands for God. The author acts like God and writes a story where he's not in the story itself, but he looks down on the characters and knows what every character is saying, every character is thinking, and gives you a complete inner and outer experience of what these characters are going through. So a lot of times you'll get a question, whose point of view is this story told in? So which, is it first person, second person, or third person? You have to really look for those pronouns to see in the story so you can answer it. The last two I have here, let me just move this up a little bit. So the other thing that HiSET tests put on the test are vocabulary words. And they will ask you questions of, did you understand the meaning of that particular word? And you have to look back at the sentence or maybe the whole paragraph to see what did that word mean. And the other thing you'll notice is there's a lot of multiple choice tests on HiSET. I've seen a few true and false, but not very many. So most times you get a multiple choice quiz. The last thing that they look at, these are terms, again, that the people who write the questions that you have to answer on the HiSET reading test, is the sequence of events. How is the story told? Does it just start at the beginning and go through a series of events and end? Or are there what they call flashbacks? Does somebody have a memory of something that explains why they have this conflict inside? So sequence of events, it can be, as I say, they call it chronological. It goes by day, or morning toward night, or week by week. There's some time element. Or it's a flashback. It goes back to the past, or it can be a flash forward. Where, like, as an example, it could be this woman's going to get married, and she's thinking forward of the day of her wedding, and part of the story is explaining that future event. So that would be a flash forward. So those 5 things are things that are looked at when questions are created for the HiSET test. So now I'll show you a few questions that I created for the outsiders. So you'll be able to see better what I'm talking about. So a possible question that could be asked in the Outsiders after reading chapter 1 is, who is the main character in the Outsiders? And there is a series of names, and you have to choose one of these names. So is it Pony Boy, is it Dally, Derry, or Johnny? Now, Pony Boy, as you don't know, if you haven't read the book, it seems strange that Pony Boy is who is starting the story. But he says, I walked out of the movie theater, and what I told you before, a main character is the person who has the goal in the story, and I can tell you, as you continue to read, it's always Pony Boy telling you something. So, and the part B of this question is, after you've chosen which one you think is the main character, then you have to write maybe a sentence. So it's multiple choice, but with a sentence explaining how do you know that's the main character. So the answer to this question, and I'll go along and tell you these answers so you get a sense of what's expected. Pony Boy is the main character. He writes the whole, S.E. Hinton is the author, but she wrote it in first-person narrative. She becomes the main character. She becomes Pony Boy. Kind of a neat trick because S.E. Hinton is a woman, a 15-year-old girl, as I told you. And she chooses to speak as Pony Boy in The Outsiders. So Pony Boy is the main character. How do I know? Because the whole book uses the pronoun I, and he doesn't, and she doesn't, and she uses she uses a lot of dialogue. When Derry talks, it's Derry talking, and you feel you're right there, and you are seeing everything that's happening as though you were Pony Boy too, because that's the way it's written. And and as you read it, you say, I walked out of the movie theater, that sort of thing. So that's first person narrative. And that means that Pony Boy is the main character. So question 2. Again, we're looking at these questions that would be asked on a high-set test, and I hope you see how different they are. You have to do the 2 parts. You have to answer part A. What's the answer to the first question? And then part B, they'll throw something else. It's 2-part questions on these questions. What is the conflict that is stated in the first chapter? Be very careful, because when you read all of these and then read what they're asking you to explain. The B part of this says, which of these are details and which one is the main idea? And these details have to be true. So greasers have to walk because they don't have cars. That's true. B, socias want to be able to have the freedom of greasers. Is that true? That the socias want to be able to have the freedom of greasers? You have to think about that. Number C, Pony Boy thinks socias have a better life than greasers. And D, Johnny gets jumped by the socias. Which of these are details and which one is the main idea? This A and this one D, those are details. Those are facts. That's what happened. But they're not the main idea. They're not the main conflict. They're examples of conflict, and they're reasons why there's conflict, but they're not the main conflict. This one B says socias want to be able to have the freedom of greasers. That's just false. There's no mention of the fact that the socias in some way envy the greasers at all. That's not true. So the answer to this one, the conflict, is that Pony Boy thinks socias have a better life than greasers. And by the end of the book, he finds out that that's not true. So the main idea is that Pony Boy thinks socias have a better life than greasers. And the whole book proves that to be incorrect. Okay. This is a vocabulary question that you would see, perhaps. What are the meanings given for the words tough, T-O-U-G-H, and tough, T-U-F-F, in Chapter 1? And here's 4 choices. Number 1, is the first word a word that means hard to chew, and the second one a feathery top? Is it B? And it has to be something from the book, not maybe it's true elsewhere, but it has to be something you read in Chapter 1. B, rough versus cool and sharp. C, one is a real word, the other is a slang. Or D, bad versus the actions of smoke. And can you guess which one it is? It's B. He meant that tough in their neighborhood. Both versions of the spelling are considered as compliments as a greaser. If you're called tough, that you're rough, and tough, that you're cool and sharp, then they like that. 2 more. Okay, so number 4. In what point of view is The Outsiders written? And I told you have to look for the different pronouns. Is it written with I, you, he, she, or it? And I've given first person, second person, third person, fourth person. Again, how do you know? I told you that Pony Boy is the main character. He writes everything with the pronoun I, and so it's written as the first person narrative. That would be your correct answer. And then down here you would say, because the book is written with the first person I throughout, and that shows it's first person. The last question that I've given you here is, it's a question about mood. And mood is something that an author is very aware of as they're writing a story. When thinking of the mood, and it's the atmosphere set by the author, created by the setting and characters of the story, what word would describe the mood you feel as a reader? So an author is setting a tone, and he's trying to set a mood in the reader. When you're reading The Outsiders, do you feel happy? B. Fearful? That's B. C. Encouraging? Or D. Peaceful? So you're looking at all of the characters, the description of what they look like, the things they say to each other, the background information that's been given to you. How do you feel as you're reading The Outsiders? And I'll leave it to you to tell me as we read further, but it's one of these and it's not the other 3, okay? So there's one more thing that I want you to keep in mind after, so these are the questions, and again, they're always wanting you to explain your answer on the high set in some way. The other part of reading for the high set includes this little diagram so that you're aware of fiction reading. And it's a little diagram that was invented by a Frenchman. I think it's Freylag. I think that's his name. But it looks like a pyramid, but it's not quite, because let's put this. Excuse me. Let me just get this. Here's our main character. I'll have him be the main character. So he starts out at the beginning of the story. Chapter 1 is about here. And in chapter 1, all of the characters are introduced, but very definitely the main character. You get the setting, and very often you'll have the conflict, or it starts to become clear to you what the goal is, at least, of the character. But you'll usually see a few people that could cause some trouble for the main character. And it should, and it's not in life either. We don't go from here and then completely get our goal, and then we go on to be very successful and have the rest of our life. We start here, we're on our way to a goal, and something happens. And so you're here, but when something bad happens, you go down. Then you're down for a little while, and then you're going along back up to the goal again. Then something else happens. You know, you have a car accident, you get married. I'm not comparing the two. I'm saying that good things happen, bad things happen, good things happen, bad things happen. Sometimes it's with nothing that you had, but that's how a story would progress. So keep those in mind when you're reading, and especially for this course where that's what you have to consider. Thank you for coming.